right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee for January 16th. We have a briefing this afternoon, an update on Maryland's Vision Zero goal for safety. As folks in this room know, we actually have a statutory goal by 2030 of reducing roadway-related deaths and serious injuries to zero. That includes cyclists and pedestrians who are often talked about in the Vision Zero context. That's obviously important, but it also includes drivers and passengers who are obviously in even higher numbers. So we want to make sure that we are making it safer for everybody. And even if in many ways this is an aspirational goal, there are definitely concrete policy steps we have taken and more we can take to improve our numbers. So with that, let's call up our first panel. We have an all-star team from the Maryland Department of Transportation. Joe McAndrew, Assistant Secretary for Planning and Product Development. Our friend Christy Nizer, the Administrator of the Motor Vehicle Administration. Administrator Pines from State Highway. And I think just to answer questions, we also have Dr. Timothy Kearns from the Maryland Highway Safety Office. So let's turn it over to our MDOT partners.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Vice Chair Boyce and members of the committee. For the record, I am Joe McAndrew, Assistant Secretary for Project Development and Delivery at the Maryland Department of Transportation. Joining me here today is State Highway Administrator Will Pines and Motor Vehicle Administrator Christine Nizer. I'm going to go ahead and provide a few brief remarks at the top to articulate what we're doing at the department to make sure that we're bending the curve as we move towards Vision Zero. And then I will hand it off to my colleagues to get into more details on what it is. But if it's all right, we were planning to hold questions until the end, and then so we can kind of get through this one. But again, thank you for inviting the Maryland Department of Transportation to provide an update on the Vision Zero Committee, which was created during last session by legislation promulgated by this committee. We appreciate and share your focus on transportation safety. And we're pleased to share with you a tremendous amount of work that we have done and progress that we are making at MDOT to drive safety and a safety culture. Deaths and serious injuries on our roads are preventable. Secretary Wiedefeld's #1 priority that he talks to me and talks to these folks and everybody in the department is safety. And that's safety of everyone using the transportation system, including those who walk, bike, and work on the transportation network. We're not just talking about safety at the department today. We are really taking action. And so a few items that we'll get into today that I just want to quickly touch on are that the Secretary signed and updated, I would argue, one of the boldest complete streets policies in the country. And we ask for you guys to hold us to account on the implementation because that's what really matters here. It's going to ultimately adopt a deliberate approach to planning, designing, and constructing the transportation projects to be safe for all users in the state. We are now moving to operationalize that policy with the release of each mode's complete streets implementation strategies this month. And this will mean that the state's default is to deliver transportation projects that are safe for everybody. The Complete Streets Leadership Academy that will touch on resulted in the delivery of 3 quick-build safety projects throughout the state that rapidly and cost-effectively improve safety outcomes for our people using our facilities. The State Highway Administration's Pedestrian Safety Action Plan targets meaningful context-driven planning and design work to transform 23 of our state's most dangerous segments. And we look forward to delivering those projects, especially with the additional aid provided in our Consolidated Transportation Program. You'll soon hear more about these and other programs from my colleagues here today. But despite these efforts, unfortunately, more than 573 people lost their lives on our state's roadways in 2024. And while this is a reduction of from 621 deaths in 2023, any death or serious injury on our roads hits close to home at MDOT. So that is why we are sharpening our focus and working together to articulate an action plan across a few different efforts so that we can drive commitment and drive output and outcomes. And this is on a 3-legged stool here. First, through actions, we will improve our approach by reorienting business practices on safety, by becoming a national leader in standards, plans, and policies and programs that drive safety. We will also be adopting innovative and experimenting with various tactics and strategies to pioneer safety improvements, such as the Complete Streets Leadership and Academy effort that we did last year. These efforts are supported through the governor's proposed budget, which provides more money for a lot of our work, but really importantly, targets $40 million in additional funds for critical Complete Streets projects statewide. This investment is a clear demonstration of the administration's commitment to creating the safest transportation system in the country and allows the state to accelerate the delivery of safer streets and will result in fewer deaths and injuries. Second is advocacy. I'm sitting here today with two of the best advocates that I know on this subject matter in the state and nationally. And we can and must use our voice to advocate for policies and programs and funding opportunities that meets the state's safety needs. We're enhancing our advocacy presence with a safe systems approach in partnership with elected officials and advocates at the local level, and with states, peer states throughout the country, USDOT, trade organizations, and our federal delegation to drive change. Third, and this is why we're excited to work with you all again this year, we need additional tools through enabling legislation to allow us to continue to drive fatalities down. Roadway design alone cannot get us where we need to go. Bold policy changes are needed to improve safety outcomes on the state's transportation system by providing new authority for MDOT and to influence safety through arenas outside of MDOT's direct purview. This session, we're working to introduce packages that are going to do just that, including keeping unsafe drivers off the road, delaying license reinstatements for folks that are proven to have vehicle convictions due to fatalities, exclusion of unsafe CDL holders by allowing Motor Vehicle Administration to exclude commercial driver's licenses holders with blood alcohol levels above legal thresholds at the administrative level, and also tackling emerging safety needs by adding the Motor Vehicle Administration to the Cannabis Health Commission. We're also looking to partner with you and others around legislative efforts to improve speed management implementation, managing speeds through expanded automated enforcement, and expanded safety education requirements. As shown through these actions, MDOT is committed to safety and Vision Zero. We will lead and partner to turn over every stone we think will help reduce fatalities. We greatly appreciate the leadership of this committee and this chairman to promote safety over multiple sessions, including the push for Vision Zero and the committee's creation, which provides an important convening space for the state's safety programs and partners. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this critical assignment. It's never done. And none of this work is possible without the committed leaders that I'm here with today. And so first I will introduce MVA Administrator Christine Neiser to go through what we're doing with the Vision Zero Committee.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be with you again. Christine Neiser, MBA Administrator, and Governor Moore's Highway Safety Representative. Also, Dr. Kearns, who the chair referenced earlier, is our Vision Zero Coordinator, and he's here as well to answer any questions that you might have. As you know, at the MBA, we have a lot of focus on driver behavior and driver safety, but in addition to that, we also have the Maryland Highway Safety Office under MBA's purview. And that's really an office that focuses every day on working with our partners, law enforcement, nonprofit, folks at the local level to reach that Vision Zero goal. And so as the Assistant Secretary referenced, we had our first meeting of the Vision Zero Committee in December. I think it was a great start of the conversation and spreading that. It was available for the public so that they could hear as well where we are and help hold us accountable, because frankly, that is what we want in terms of reaching the goals. We will talk about the data first because it is important, but as I know you've heard me say a million times, we never want to lose track of the fact that these are not just numbers. These are members of our community and loved ones. And, you know, one of the things that I take as a profound honor, frankly, is to know the families so well. And to know the families is to push you to get Vision Zero, because the reality is the pain for them exists today as it did when that first crash occurred. Some good news here compared to where we were last year when we were updating you on numbers. So as the Assistant Secretary said, we are down to 573. I will caution you that these are preliminary numbers. As you know, there's 30 days for fatalities to get into the books from the end of the year. We have not passed that threshold yet. There are also crash reports that are just still being finalized at the local level. So we will likely see some changes in that number. But the good news, we're moving in the right direction. It does show that that 2023 was a bit of an anomaly when it comes to where we were from a fatality stamp, which is always good news to see the movement in the right direction. Unfortunately, the one component of the 2024 data that's still concerning is the high percentage that we see in terms of bicycle and pedestrian fatalities. And that is an area that the Secretary and the Governor are passionate about, and how can we bring that number down. Our vulnerable roadway users obviously are a critical component of our network of transportation, and we need to find a way for them to be able to get where they need to go safely. As I think it's important as well, on the next slide, you'll see a historical look. And the Assistant Secretary referenced policy change, whether it's legislation, technology enhancement. I always like to look at this chart because it shows it makes a difference. What you all do in terms of passing laws makes a difference. It might be a little small to see there. I'm happy to make sure you can see it a little better, but whether it's .08, whether it's seatbelt laws, all of the things that happen at a federal level, a state level, the technology in terms of electronic stability control that are passed through our federal agencies, they matter in terms of moving us in the right direction. Obviously, we saw some anomalies as it comes to COVID, and now we're trying to respond and make sure we get back on that downward trajectory. In terms of leading causes of fatalities, I think it's always important to remember this because we know that all the components of highway safety are important, whether it's what we do from an education standpoint, our enforcement partners, certainly engineering, which you'll hear about, or emergency medical services are all important. But what we know is that our behavior is influencing what happens out there on the roadways. And that's why, although it can seem overwhelming to look at the data and to see those numbers, I know, we all know that we can drive them down if we just, every time we get behind the wheel, each and every one of us, think about what we're doing and are deliberate. And that's why we use the word crash and not accident. You'll hear me reference that often. I would love if folks could join me in that effort, because I think using the word accident, one, it diminishes the pain that these families go through. And two, it also gives the impression that, you know, it really wasn't a deliberate thing. But the reality is if you're speeding 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, or if you got impaired and then got behind the wheel, or if you picked up that phone or didn't buckle up, those are all things that you could have chosen to do the safe thing when you got behind the wheel. So always think it's important as we look at those common causes of fatalities. So you'll see that whether it's in our education, whether it's in our outreach, we're always emphasizing these issues because these are really the things that can make a difference as we look to drive those numbers down. I point to seatbelt usage. I do think it's important because oftentimes as I talk to folks, they say, well, everybody buckles up, right? And the reality is that is not always the case. In particular, we do still see an issue with backseat passengers not being belted, and I always try to remind folks that those backseat unrestrained passengers can be just as deadly to someone who is properly buckled in the front seat because they become projectiles in a crash, and we've had some very unfortunate cases where they've actually severely injured or killed somebody who was buckled in the front seat. And so you can see there is a distinction. We do an observational study every year. It is required by the federal government. We do see differences in cars, SUVs versus trucks. We do see differences on different types of roadways. We try to look at that data and figure out how we can nuance it, again, to message in the right way to get the message to the folks who truly can change that behavior. It really is about that data-driven approach. I'm really proud that the partners came together to launch our fatal crash dashboard. As you know, in Maryland, our crash data is owned by our Maryland State Police, but all the partners use the data in different ways. And so together we came and we launched our fatal crash dashboard in April of '23. And really that's all about putting good information in the hands of our partners, our local partners, our statewide partners, so they can make decisions about what they should be doing from a resource standpoint and making sure that we're really investing in the right places. It is updated daily. It includes open reports and open investigations. There is no PII on it. But I encourage you to go there at zero-md.gov, and you can see a lot of great information down the county level, roadway types. There's a lot of great data that you can play with. We are looking at how we can enhance that. We've talked a lot to our partners about what they need, what additional data they need, because it doesn't make sense for everybody to go out there and build dashboards. It makes more sense for the state to invest in it, and then for those partners to be able to use what we've created. And so we look forward to continuing to partner, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So I mentioned our local partners. So we have a statewide strategic highway safety plan, and I'll go into some of those emphasis areas shortly. But we have encouraged our local jurisdictions to develop their own plans, because we know that in different jurisdictions, there are different issues that are the emphasis point. And so the local plans really enable them to focus and pay attention to those important issues. Almost as importantly, I always say, it brings everybody to the table. Having that conversation is just as important as the output, and oftentimes brings things to light that people just didn't know because they weren't sharing information. And so I am really proud to show on the map the good work that's been done. The Highway Safety Office actually funded a position at the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, and BMC has been great in not just restricting where they've provided support to local jurisdictions to their region, but actually even going beyond their region to support efforts for the local jurisdictions to develop their plans, because we know not every jurisdiction has the same number of resources. Highway Safety Office also supports them in terms of data and other information. So you can see where we have implementation, but we've also got a lot of counties who are in progress. You can see by the next slide, we're excited to see that now local jurisdictions are joining the conversation too, and really starting to invest in developing their own plans. So it's great to see that, and that the conversation continues. So lots in progress, lots of expressed interest, and we just want to continue to move that forward. If any of the jurisdictions that you represent are interested in and are not reflected here, or are reflected here and want to revise theirs, because that's the other thing too. Like with our strategic highway safety plan, we're in the process of revising it and creating our next plan, and we do that with a lot of partner feedback. Same with the local jurisdictions. It can't be a plan that just sits on the shelf. It really needs to be evergreen and something that they constantly evolve.
I know you want to wait on questions, but Chair's prerogative. Can you just go back 2 slides? Because I think a lot of people are going to ask about this. Can you just talk a little bit more about this map and what's orange and what's not? Because you're going to get questions about it.
Sure. So what this is about is the jurisdictions who have adopted those local plans that I'm talking about. In those plans, it really is about what does your data say your problem areas are, and what are you doing to address that? What are your action plans in order to address the fatality issues that are most prevalent? And so some of the plans are very much aligned with what the state's plan looks like. Some of them are different in their own unique way. Some of them are managed by the Transportation Department. Others are led by like a law enforcement agency. It really depends on the jurisdiction, and we encourage that because we want the jurisdiction to own it. In some counties, they've actually mandated it by legislation. There's a requirement for this to happen. And so we want that to be completely filled in, which is probably the chair's point. And so we are looking forward to continuing the conversation. We know that it's not an issue that is only of concern in the counties that are shaded in, but also everywhere. So that's why we try to break down the resource issue and make sure that we're there in support of the jurisdictions who might not have implemented yet.
Okay, but this is quite the geographic divide, and it's clearly not a political divide because of other things that are filled in. So could you just talk a little bit more about how we're working to make sure the rest of the counties in the state are putting together plans?
Sure. We've done a lot of outreach with the jurisdictions. The Secretary actually sent a letter to the county executives of every county last year, inviting them to participate in this effort, thanking them if they'd already done it, inviting them to participate, providing contacts. I will also say that there is some federal funding available. If you already have your plan, you can actually use funding for construction efforts that are safety related. If you don't have your plan, there's some federal funding that can help there as well. So it's not like the jurisdiction is out on their own. The Maryland Highway Safety Office can provide data, jurisdiction-specific data, and provide kind of logistical support as the jurisdictions are developing it. So we try to reach out at the top to local elected officials. We mentioned it at the CTP tour, which you all are very familiar with as we go across the state. And then we also have our partners, again, whether it's at that transportation agency or somewhere else. Does that address? Okay, so talked a little bit about the emphasis areas of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. These are committees and teams that work on different areas in highway safety that are reflected as the areas that are challenges for us in terms of the crash data. So, we've got an overarching plan, strategic highway safety plan that Vision Zero informs, and then we've got those strategic areas that we really want to make a difference in. And so I don't have time to go into all of them, but I did want to give a few examples that I know are quite of interest to the committee. Certainly impaired driving. We've done some really creative things, I think, here in terms of really trying to get out into the community in different ways than we have in the past. Not only in terms of just raising awareness, but looking at jurisdictions where some of these issues are really prevalent, looking at the data. I'm glad that Prince George's County, who's a great partner of us, is here today to talk about it, because frankly, as I talk about reductions, I'm not going to steal their thunder in terms of specifics, but they are part of that huge reduction number. So Prince George's County, as we all know, has been one of the higher number jurisdictions in terms of fatalities, and seeing a huge reduction in their number of individuals lost on the road, I think, is a great step forward and a testament to the work they've done. We've really focused our efforts in some communities in Prince George's County where we've seen a lot of significant crashes, impaired driving related, and we've engaged the HBCUs and done some really targeted outreach there as well. And so getting out into the community, making sure that folks are aware of who we are, that we're a resource for them, that there's other options. We've done a lot of programs in terms of grant funding that you may have heard about. The Governor's Highway Safety Association awarded us funding for Lyft around the holidays. But we did something unique this year. We not only did some statewide, we targeted some in Prince George's County. So if you were taking a ride in Prince George's County, had to start or end there, there was a specific pot of money that was geared towards that area. Again, we're trying to use the data to inform our decisions. So if that's where some of the challenges are, let's make sure that we're allotting funding to make sure folks can take advantage of that. We also completed a lot of training in terms of impaired driving. Assistant Secretary mentioned earlier our efforts in terms of cannabis awareness. Obviously, that's something that's an emerging issue that we want to make sure that we're on the front end of, and so we've done a lot of training. You may have heard something called Green Labs. That is for law enforcement to work with individuals and observe behaviors that happen after they consume cannabis. What does that look like? They perform sobriety tests and get a chance to observe somebody in an environment that's not threatening in any way and have a better sense of what that looks like. And so we did 13 of those trainings throughout the last year. And really wanting to just make sure, again, that as we move forward, as things evolve, that we're responding to those evolving circumstances. Also, just to mention the Impaired Driving Task Force and the wide representation it has on it, because I think this is important. We have a state judicial outreach liaison as well as a traffic safety resource prosecutor. Again, we want to cover all areas of the system so that we are talking to folks who are out there prosecuting cases, talking to the judges, and trying to make sure that not only is education out there, but are we doing the right things in terms of the information that we're providing. Problem-solving courts, you may have previously heard of them as impaired driving courts, drugged courts. Really, those courts come together and provide a comprehensive set of resources for that individual to change behavior. It's not just about sentencing somebody. It's not just about suspending their license. It's about what resources do they need. Do they need treatment? Do they need help with employment? What is that service that we can provide in a very comprehensive way to ensure that they're not back in the system again? And then community-based organizations. And so it's really a very dynamic task force that is actively engaged and working on these issues to help us bring solutions to the table as it relates to impaired driving. Obviously, I couldn't mention impaired driving without talking a little bit about the extension of Noah's Law that was passed last year. Certainly our gratitude to the legislature for that commitment. It is a little early. As you know, the law went into effect October 1, and its violations that happened after October 1, so it is early, but we are in the process of preparing our annual ignition interlock report. That report, and I should have mentioned we have links to all the local strategic highway safety plans. So that's all on our website, and the Noah's Law ignition interlock reports are also located there, so you'll be able to see that. And so I had mentioned earlier our concern in terms of pedestrian and bicycle and vulnerable roadway user data, just, not going down to the extent that we would like as we try to reach that goal of Vision Zero. We also have a committee that is focused on that and what needs to happen. So you can see some law enforcement activities, traffic safety initiatives to focus on changing driving behavior, engaging with those drivers right there where there's a pedestrian crosswalk and folks aren't stopping. Again, using that data to say, where should we be? Where should we engage with the community? And then Highway Safety Office funding overtime enforcement activities to really make sure that message is getting home. In addition to that, some of the other fun things that we've done. So last year for Read Across America, we went Read Across Maryland, and we were in jurisdictions from each end of the state with Cheswick the crab, who was named after, if you remember, a very tragic situation in Ocean City where a young man lost his life. We bring that to our youngest students with the idea that just like with seatbelts and other things, sometimes it is the youngest among us who help change behavior and remind the parents. Based on some of the stories I heard from these young people, their parents definitely needed that reminder. Some of these stories were too good to have been made up by a second or third grader in terms of what they observed their parents doing. So it's a good reminder that we all need to be careful when we have little ones in the car, not that we shouldn't be careful all the time, but especially when they're in the car. Walk to School Day. So again, this is about making sure that, young people are following those safety tips as they're beginning getting out on the roadway and walking to school. A walk audit with grant that was funded at Central High School, and Ride Walk for Your Life. Finally, I just want to go over a few of the outreach campaigns that we're doing. So if you see them, you see it's part of that larger campaign. So Be the Driver is a campaign that we launched in 2020 with the idea that we wanted to be comprehensive. We didn't want an impaired driving campaign out there that didn't relate to pedestrian safety. We want everything to have that one connection. Unfortunately, as we launched it, we were in the midst of COVID, so you can see cartoon characters reflected here. We are transitioning now to real-life actors and actresses because of the idea that it makes that message a little more real life. If you see somebody who is a real individual engaged in these important conversations. And so we have various campaigns all around the idea that you have the responsibility, be the driver who saves lives. You might have seen, and I know Will's going to talk a lot more about our important work in terms of road work safety and the safety of our workers out on the highways, along with the governor and lieutenant governor's leadership and the working group that they put together last year. Under their direction, we dedicated grant funding to be used specifically for outreach campaigns. So you may have seen some commercials with famous Orioles, some Ravens, our governor, our lieutenant governor out there, just trying to have faces, again, that people relate to, that carry that message about how important it is to look out for those who are vulnerable on the roadways. And so the campaign ran from April through October, generated more than 68 million impressions. We had commercials on radio as well as TV and social media, and continuing to get the word out. We're going to do a lot more coming soon in terms of work zone safety, so stay tuned as we put more announcements out there, again, looking at what we do with our youngest individuals and how we can engage them in these efforts and really ensure that they are aware. I mentioned earlier in terms of our data collection, we're really excited to announce that we just got a grant from NHTSA for $13.2 million. That is over 5 years, and that'll be shared amongst the state agencies, including the department, including state police, Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services system. It will help us make upgrades to our data system, which again is such a critical component of what we do, knowing where and having up-to-date data that is as real-time as we possibly can be and as accurate as we possibly can be, only goes to further our Vision Zero goal. Maryland was one of only 19 states, and I believe we received the most amount of funding. So really proud of that and the partners who came together to do it. A final slide, I just always like to make a pitch, and time is really good at this point. One of the things the Highway Safety Office does is reach out into the community to provide grant funding for organizations who are engaged in these kind of highway safety efforts from an education standpoint, from an outreach standpoint. We're always looking for new grantees. individuals, groups who are interested in working with us and doing creative things in the community. So just put the notice there. It's also on the website. If you're interested, please reach out to me, and happy to share the information with anybody who would like. We are always, again, looking for partners who are willing to work with us. We know in the area of highway safety, not one person, not one solution. It is about the group coming together, working together every day, finding new solutions. And I know that's really what the Secretary has asked us to be, not only collaborative, but innovative in terms of what we're doing in this area. So thank you for your time. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Administrator Pines.
Well, thank you, Administrator Neiser, and good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and committee members. For the record, I'm Will Pines, Administrator for the Maryland State Highway Administration. And building off of Administrator Neiser's presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of the many steps that State Highway has been taking to advance the Vision Zero goals statewide. The safety of our customers on our highways, whether they're walking, biking, driving, or taking transit, is the #1 priority of the Maryland State Highway. To ensure the safety of our roadway users, we must leverage every tool in our toolbox to support Vision Zero and the goal of reducing fatalities and serious injuries on our roadways. In partnership with our Maryland Highway Safety Office, we're working to achieve that Vision Zero goal, utilizing a combination of engineering, education, enforcement, and emergency services solutions, or what we call the 4 E's. And we're covering those 4 E's through our holistic focus on safety, addressing work zones, vulnerable road users, employees, and asset safety. We are working and reimagining our highway system, and doing so through new planning, design, and construction strategies to meet the needs of Marylanders' diverse communities. Our toolbox of solutions includes programs that you may be familiar with. They're things like the Context-Driven Toolkit, our Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, and the Vulnerable Road User Report, which, as Chrissy had mentioned, we talked about the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. That report is embedded within the statewide Strategic Highway Safety Plan. On the SHA Context-Driven Guide, this is a resource that our engineering teams are using that focuses on land use, context-centric approach that allows us to better plan and design for safer multimodal transportation system to meet the respective community needs. Whether it's an urban center like Bethesda or rural areas such as Vienna on the Eastern Shore, we recognize that each has its own unique set of challenges, and this guide helps us to design based on those differing needs based on the context. The Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, or what we often refer to as the PSAP program, was released in the spring of 2023, and this prioritizes the state's most critical need corridors through a data-driven approach informed by our context-driven guide, roadway condition, and crash data. Improvements along these segments focus on pedestrian and bicyclist safety, and are using proven safety countermeasures to effectively reduce roadway fatalities and serious injuries, focused really on those vulnerable road users. And I'll come back to this point with the PSAP program further in the presentation when I'll get into some specific projects that we've been advancing statewide. We also have our Vulnerable Road User Safety Assessment, or the VRU, which was completed in November of 2023. This assessment expands upon the PSAP, considering multiple years of crash data, consultation with local partners, and public input by identifying additional segments of state roadways across Maryland with significant safety challenges for pedestrians and bicyclists. We have seen our toolbox continue to grow over the years, which is a testament to Maryland's commitment to safer roadways. With the depth of design and engineering resources available to us, we're encouraged by the process we've made so far to achieve the Vision Zero goal, but we know that there is more work ahead. Also, SHA performs fatal infrastructure reviews for pedestrian and bicycle fatalities that occur on state roads. And those, as Chrissy mentioned earlier, we have recently launched the Vision Zero Commission, and these fatal infrastructure reviews are discussed at those meetings. The reviews are also summarized in an interactive GIS mapping interface that allows us to make the reviews accessible and publicly available. SHA prioritizes spot improvements identified in these reviews through the lens of the context and considering the roadway users and the safe system approach. With Complete Streets funds included in the proposed final CTP, we anticipate delivering on more of these types of spot improvements. As Assistant Secretary McAndrew mentioned, last summer, MDOT updated the department's Complete Streets policy, which focuses on ensuring that each modal administration, like SHA, is prioritizing and considering active transportation throughout all phases of our project development process. SHA is actively working on implementing our implementation plan for the Complete Streets policy, and this includes updating guidelines, standards, and manuals that inform decision-making related to active transportation. These manuals are things like the Maryland Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, our lighting policy, and accessibility and bike policy design guidelines that are, these are all being revamped as part of achieving that policy. Now I'd like to turn to more project-focused actions. A lot of you are probably interested in the infrastructure or engineering side of the 4 E's. And so SHA has taken an advancement of those vulnerable road user projects with our Vision Zero efforts. Thanks to funding through the Investment and Jobs Act, SHA has been working hard to pursue and is proud that we've received a number of federal grants to support several of our accessibility-focused safety projects. For example, just last week, we were awarded $11.8 million RAISE grant to fund the construction of 2.3 miles of shared use path on Maryland 210 in Prince George's County. Similarly, we received a $3.3 million Reconnecting Communities grant to fund construction of sidewalks, pedestrian signals, and raised medians that will enhance pedestrian access to shopping, restaurants, and schools along and across US 50 in Easton. And there are many more project examples like this statewide. Also, last fall, again, as the Assistant Secretary mentioned, we partnered with Smart Growth America to launch projects in Howard County, the city of Hagerstown, and the town of Bel Air on the Complete Streets Leadership Academy. Through this partnership, SHA developed and deployed temporary Complete Streets focused demonstration projects that improve safety for vulnerable road users and motorists. These are oftentimes referred to as quick build projects and included safety improvements like lane narrowing, the installation of speed cushions and hardened centered lines, flex post, and crosswalk enhancements. The demonstration projects process allows us to test innovative products and also the installations in areas where motorists may take adjusting to the vulnerable road user safety features. And that quick build trial allows for the test period to work so that any kinks are, for the benefit of all road users are worked out through that test period. SHA also continues to advance our PSAP program addressing critical need roadway segments across Maryland. These improvements are along the corridors that really are data-driven, and again, they're safety-focused projects in our most dangerous corridors and focused on vulnerable road user safety. This fall, we began public involvement and early project development activities on these projects across the board. Some of the ongoing first phase of projects include Maryland 650 in Prince George's and Montgomery counties, Maryland 2 in Anne Arundel County, Maryland 410 in Prince George's County, US 1 in Howard County, and Maryland 150 in Baltimore County. We also have a second suite of PSAP project improvement segments that have also, many of which have already started or completed their public engagement process for those early phases. And this includes US 40 in Washington County, Maryland 193 in Montgomery County, US 40 in Harford County, Maryland 410, and Maryland 201 in Prince George's County. Yesterday, MDOT released the FY25 through FY30 Consolidated Transportation Program, which reflects the department's commitment on that proposed budget to Maryland's multimodal transportation system. In that program, you will see that there was an addition of $38 million in Complete Streets funding and a restoration of funding for critical safety and infrastructure projects like the Maryland 97 Montgomery Hills project, which enhances bicycle safety and pedestrian safety and connectivity, while also balancing vehicular safety and mobility along the Maryland 97 corridor. Additionally, US 15 and I-81, Phase 2, both of which see high rates of vehicle crashes and heavily delayed freight corridors. These were also fully funded for construction and are critical needs for Maryland's economic growth. And additionally, funding was provided for preliminary engineering on US 1, Phase 2 and 3 to extend the multimodal focused improvements recently deployed after we just completed that Phase 1 project. SHA also has several programs with significant funding attached that will help enhance our efforts on Vision Zero over the next 6 years, including $21.7 million for safety and spot improvements, $4.9 million for bicycle retrofit projects, $10 million for capital sidewalk projects, and $3 million for ADA retrofits. And these are to name a few. Obviously, the CTP has a lot more details than that in it. It's a big book, but we've got a lot of really great projects that are safety focused incorporated in there. I'm turning the page a little bit here. Another focus area for us, SHA, is supporting Vision Zero through our focus on road worker protections. Chrissy mentioned that a little bit in her remarks. And that also includes the safety of our employees who are out working hard on the roads every day. SHA participated in and is now implementing recommendations from the governor's work safety group, which was chaired by the lieutenant governor and also had a significant contributing roles from Administrator Nizer and our Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Terry Seuss. One of the most critical recommendations was the implementation of improvements to the work zone speed monitoring program. SHA has successfully implemented the software and physical changes that are necessary to implement the new fine structure that was part of the Road Worker Protection Act, which passed last legislative session. We also hosted the National Work Zone Safety Press Conference to promote education that leads to our working team members returning to their families every day. We've been revisiting how we perform our work and have purchased equipment like those that you can see on the screen that will, like our litter pickers and Trax mowers, that will help keep our team members out of the traffic and while litter pickup is done and mowing is done. Tying back to our 4 E's, we're also focused on the education piece in our work zone, both in terms of making sure that our employees and our contractor workforce are well trained, and we know that we have more to do to help the public be aware of certain items like the move over law. That's why we've been partnering with local law enforcement agencies to perform high visibility enforcement events along our maintenance operations alongside them and on state routes. During one recent event paired with our maintenance crews, police made 48 traffic stops, issuing 15 tickets and 45 warnings in less than a 3-hour period, and those were associated with move over law. Many of the folks who were pulled over said they didn't know about the move over law. We are trying new innovative concepts like our drone study for work zone speed management, and will continue to use routine events like our Unity Ride to bolster awareness and education on the importance of work zone safety. As you can see, there are many projects and programs and initiatives ongoing at SHA that are focused on supporting the state's aspirational goal of Vision Zero. And I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity of presenting today. I'm proud of the work that the SHA team is doing and the focus that we have on safety every day. And with that, our team would be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you all, and I appreciate that as an organization, but also the three of you as individuals, work very hard on this. MDOT, the Department of Transportation, often sends representatives to GoShoe and GoSpike installations, which unfortunately we have to do, and Administrator Pines, you actually called the parent of someone who lost their life in my district, so I appreciate the sort of personal commitment to the Administrator Neiser's point that these are not just numbers, but also people. I will say, since you mentioned Montgomery Hills, back in fiscal year 24, not my district, but back in fiscal year 24, it had construction funding programmed, and now it has no construction funding all the way out till 2030. So appreciate that it's moving forward in some capacity, but shovels in the ground is when we'll really see the difference there, not planning and design. Looks like we have a number of questions. We'll start with Delegate Foley.
If I may, Chair, on Montgomery Hills, that project, we have recently deemed that it's eligible for Highway Safety Improvement Program funding through Federal Highway. That unlocks a higher contribution of federal funding towards the project. So we're going to try to use that and work hard to get the construction money back in there.
Great, but the draft CTP, or excuse me, the final CTP came out yesterday, so did you just find that out this morning?
No, we've known that, but we're not there with it programmed yet.
Great. Well, looking forward to seeing that and many other projects actually show construction in the out years. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your presentation. I have two questions. The first is I was a little surprised that I didn't see a distracted driving on your list because I've read elsewhere that distracted driving is actually more of a problem when it comes to crashes and particularly fatalities than impaired driving. So I don't know whether you have any data on distracted driving and what are you doing about that? And then, Mr. Chair, if I could, I have another question afterwards.
No, it's a good question, and certainly didn't list all the main causes, but distracted driving is one of them. And just to be clear, that is not just cell phone use, that really is distraction in the vehicle. I will say we just got a presentation the other day at our Traffic Records Coordinating Council. There's some enhancements we've made to law enforcement crash reports to be a little more specific, because a high number of crashes are recorded as that failure to pay full time and attention. But what does that mean, right? And so trying to nuance that in a better way than new requirements for crash data provide additional level of detail to us. So I think in the future we'll be able to give a better sense of what that actually is. We can't just rely on the number of people who get citations for use of cell phones or texting while driving. And so generally speaking, if someone's involved in a crash, failure to pay full time and attention was part of the reason that crash occurred. So what we're trying to really nuance in the data is what is distraction and what is the cause of distraction versus just what happens in terms of any crash itself. But certainly part of our messaging is always full time and attention has to happen at all times. And use of any kind of electronic device takes your eyes away from the roadway. That 2 to 3 seconds can be the length of a football field depending the speed at which you're traveling at.
So you don't have any data on distracted driving and how the impact that, because I've seen that elsewhere. I've seen that reported elsewhere.
Yeah, we do have distracted driving data. As I said, though, we are kind of nuancing that to make sure that it is not over-reported from just the failure to pay full time and attention. So we can give some follow-on data to you there, certainly.
See, I don't know how you could over-report it. You're distracted or you're not. But anyway, that's okay. I just was surprised I didn't see it in the report. And then my second question is not related to that, if I may, Mr. Chair, which is, you did say that you got a grant for state electronic data collection to help you with that. And I just wondered two things about that. One, is there automated enforcement data included in that, for example, from speed cameras or or red light cameras or, if things like that. And are you able to share that information across states now that you're collecting it? You have enhanced electronic collection tools.
So it's a really good question. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a blind spot for us at MBA and the Highway Safety Office. The only data we receive from automated enforcement is when people fail to pay citations and we're asked by the jurisdiction to put a flag on the record. There is a section in statute that does not allow us to see all of that data. I think it was an old vestige of the laws on automated enforcement when it first went into place. I do know certainly, and State Highway Administration, is happy to share with us their data, but in terms of locals, there really is a prohibition for them to share the data, and we certainly wouldn't ask them to do something in violation of the law. In terms of sharing from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, we went to the step with the District of Columbia of getting any individual with a Maryland tag who was caught speeding. There was a lot of media attention to folks who were speeding at a high rate of speed in the district from surrounding jurisdictions, and so those individuals received a letter in November, December timeframe from the Motor Vehicle Administration telling them that we have data, that they were taking that unsafe action, reminding them the consequences of taking the unsafe action. And for those who were caught multiple times, they got an even more severe letter saying that this is repeat behavior. We recognize that if they're doing that in the District of Columbia, they're likely doing it in Maryland as well. So that was our first attempt. It was the first time we actually did that. And DC was happy to share that data with us. We don't have authority to take any other action. And I think while that is important is because as automated enforcement increases, we don't have that same visibility today. With a driving record, we knew if a driver was taking unsafe behavior based on what was reflected on the driving record and their consequences for that. The same doesn't hold true with automated enforcement, and that's something I know that the legislature will likely have conversations about this year.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here and for your work on this important highway safety, and I do appreciate all of that. I'm going to mention a specific road, but I'm not asking you about a specific area because you obviously can't answer that on the spot. I'm going to use that as an example and then take a step back to a higher level. So we have had complaints about Frederick Road between Catonsville and Ellicott City. That's Route 144. There have been a number of accidents there, including pedestrian fatalities. And your engineers did a very, Administrator Pines, SHA engineers, did a very thorough job. We really appreciate their looking at this and really doing an analysis. But the bottom line is it came down to, I believe that no changes were recommended, and they requested the police to do additional enforcement. This is a road that people drive at a very high rate of speed. There's a curve that's known as Dead Man's Curve. But on this project, to take a step back, on this project, this road and other areas as well, often when constituents complain about safety, there seems to be a resistance to any kind of changes that would impede traffic. And I think we're in a transition period now where you're really looking at complete streets. We're trying to make sure that the streets are for everyone and not just cars. And I just wondered if you could address a little bit that tension between getting cars through, but also making sure that they're safe for everybody. And sometimes enforcement is not the only answer. Sometimes design changes may be needed.
So, yeah, I'll start at a high level and say that part of the Complete Streets policy effort is to update our guidance and our manuals and our standards to help reinforce that speeding in roadways that's resulting in pedestrian fatalities, we need to do what we can to try to take that risk and lower it on our routes. We do see where, it's NHTSA that publishes data on speeds. If you get up over 40 miles an hour, you're upwards of 90% chance of somebody perishing if they're involved in a crash. So 40 miles an hour in a lot of roads doesn't feel that fast, frankly. And so we know that we have to get speeds down. There's a focus with the department and some of the legislation we've been working through, as Assistant Secretary mentioned, on addressing speeds holistically. It is very challenging to balance between traffic, our mobility goals, and safety goals. They don't always align well. Some of the members here are familiar with projects where we've put in bike lanes or amenities that will result in feedback about delays. We've observed delays as short as 2 to 3 minutes garner nearly 10,000 comments about how painful that is. It's tough. That's one of the great things about the Complete Streets Leadership Academy process, is it does that quick build idea where we can have a trial period and let people feel it and get used to it, and then build the actual physical infrastructure where we can put in temporary things that see how it feels. But we do know that just like speed monitoring, right, those are there to slow people down. The drivers do not like them, right? That's just the reality of it. But we need to protect lives and safety as a first priority. And so we do need to advance infrastructure and policies that promote reducing speeds for safety.
Thank you. So, and yes, drivers don't like that, but drivers are not the only ones on the roads. And it seems to me that sometimes the drivers are not the people that live there. They're traveling through an area, whereas the people that live there may be more concerned about safety. So as you're working on these, and the Complete Streets Leadership Academy, I think that's the trial is a great idea. And so as you're working through these things, are you looking at balancing that and understanding that sometimes we just have to deal with the complaints and understand that drivers are going to complain?
We are, absolutely. Okay. We're trying, as we update our design guidance, we're going to try to find the sweet spot. And again, that's really what context-driven is about. It recognizes that rural Maryland is not the same as an urban town center, right? We need to treat those conditions appropriately for what the communities need in those areas. And you're exactly right that our customers as motorists oftentimes have different views than the communities that they're traveling through. So we try to balance that differing perspective as well.
Thank you so much. May I ask a different question, Mr. Chair? Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Administrator Pines, I was really happy to hear you mention the move over slow down law, because this is a pet peeve of mine. You can ask my husband. He hears me yelling whenever we're in the car, because sometimes I feel like I'm the only person that follows this law. And you're right that people don't seem to know about it either. And I did notice, I was very happy when it first went into effect, that you had the big signs alerting people of it, the changeable signs. And so I don't know if that's something that you can periodically refresh to remind people that that law is there. And you mentioned doing some enforcement in targeted areas. Was that specifically related to the work zones, or are you also doing it outside of work zones as well?
Where move-over law has been kind of greatest challenge to us tends to be in the more rural areas where enforcement is oftentimes lower. Just frankly, there's not as many officers there. And so we have been working intimately when we have litter crews that are out on the shoulders working, that we've paired up with officers to do enforcement at the same time. And it's worked really well in terms of making that connection. As I mentioned in my remarks, the majority of them have been warnings because it is intended to be an education. But to your first question, absolutely, I can go back to our chart team and look into our overhead usage and education more on the move over law.
That'd be great, thank you. And I also wondered if, I think sometimes if there are creative solutions, like I use the app Waze for navigation, and it does say like vehicle stopped and shoulder. And I wonder if there's any way we can make arrangements with them to have it say vehicle stopped and shoulder, move over, or something along those lines. I don't know if they would charge for that or if that's something they would consider. Is that something you've ever thought about?
We We are in, there's what's called a Connected Communities Agreement with Waze to exchange data, stuff from our roadway data sharing over to them and vice versa. I can certainly ask the question on that. In our work zones, you can use what's called a HOZ system that communicates the conditions of the work zone out to Waze and will alert drivers that, hey, there's a work zone at this location. So we've been deploying that on certain projects. So we have a good relationship with them, and I think we can pursue that. I'm not sure that they'll change their app to change all of the
Sure.
narrative, but we can try.
Thank you so much. Sorry to take so much time.
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pines, it's good to see you. I'm sure you knew that I was going to have a discussion with you. And first of all, I want to thank you for all the discussions we've had about a particular roadway in my district, Maryland 150. So I'll use that as an example, but kind of work out a little bit from that like Delegate Ruth did. As you know, Administrator, and your team has been great, and you've been extremely accessible with all the discussions around that roadway and the particular dangerous stretch of road there, and the work that SHA is already doing to improve some of those stretches of road. In some of our discussions, of course, what has kind of become glaring to me is, and maybe this is something that we need to change on our side here in Annapolis, but your ability, SHA's ability to look at development projects inside of these kinds of areas where you have a high amount of fatalities that are going on, and then we're adding big new things to those areas to put even more vehicles onto those roads. So, I wanted to get your opinion, Mr. Administrator, of what we could do to help you in those circumstances where we're looking to put like big commercial projects. Particularly, I'm thinking about my instance with Maryland 150, but I know there's others probably that might exist where you have a very dangerous stretch of road already, and you're going to add potentially tens of thousands of vehicles to that road every day with some improvement, but maybe not enough to really kind of handle those extra vehicles that are going to be on the road. So what could we do to kind of look at a circumstance like that to help you, to provide more tools for you to be able to more adequately deal with those kinds of circumstances?
So thank you for the question. Frankly, in my tenure as administrator, the majority of the complaints that I get are around development projects.
Sure.
It's a very challenging issue. They're often quickly political. The reality of how development works, the planning and zoning function is handled at a county level. So there are ordinances, or what's referred to as APFOs, that each county has, and they are vastly different across the state. We do have some published manuals and guidelines that sort of inform what we would like to see in our routes. But ultimately, if a county has an APFO or they have a strong opinion about the development, we try to work with the county to get to what the requirements are for respective developers in each county. So some counties, we frankly just don't have issues because their county focus on complete streets and continuity across a corridor is much more in line with SHA's goal to have corridor continuity. What we see, some counties do not have that, and it results in development happening in a hodgepodge fashion. The developers are required to mitigate their impacts kind of on the frontage of the development. But as multiple developments accumulate, the impacts will start to impact the entire corridor. And so you can get fragments of sidewalks built, but not connectivity to key resources. So this is a big topic. I probably could do a whole hearing just on that. I don't know if I can give specific recommendations right now on what the legislature actions it could do, but it is challenging. Some counties will actually apply a developer fee with each project so that as impacts are accruing, there's a pot that's growing, and then those can be applied in agreements with SHA to improve whole corridors. Others drop a project in the CTP request and say, State Highway, come behind and fix this. There's a lot of variability across the state, and it's challenging.
Sure, and I appreciate that, and so maybe that's maybe a follow-up that, and your team's been great. We've had lots of discussions, but maybe there's some follow-up discussion there about ways that we could maybe look more holistically from our side here. Maybe not this session, but in future sessions to kind of help you provide more tools in the toolbox to deal with certain circumstances like that.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. This is a great presentation. I particularly loved the graph on page 4 about the fatalities over time. Of course, it's troubling that we, basically, even though we've had fluctuations, we really have not improved since 2000. Since, it's hard to believe, but that's 25 years. We really have not improved. My first couple questions are just on more information because I love these charts. Do y'all have one that's per capita? Because I would love to see over time how those fatalities have been, either per 100,000 residents or per vehicle miles traveled would be, I think, really helpful to look at. If y'all have that and could send it to the committee, that would be awesome. The other thing I wondered if you had is injuries per time, because I know that we've been hovering around 40,000 crash-related injuries per year for a long time. I'd also love to see that over 100,000 period time, just as a stats nerd. So y'all, if y'all have that and you could send it to us, that would be awesome.
Will do. SHA does track vehicle miles traveled, so we can show you the data that way. And we also do have injury data. Some good news in terms of injury data, in that I think as vehicles get more safer,
Right.
people are surviving crashes, so that's not showing up in your fatality number, but folks are surviving it based on the construction of the vehicles.
Right. Though it does, I think, it does prevent deaths to some degree, right? And so that's why it's troubling that in the last 25 years, despite, improvemements to health and improvements to hospital, medicine and improvements to cars, and we have all these like auto braking systems now that we didn't have in 2000, the fatality front, we really haven't moved. But my second question is, you mentioned this in response to Delegate Foley's question, where do y'all stand on reciprocity? Not just with automated enforcement, but just where do y'all stand generally? Not that there's any bill or anything like that, but on the ability for MVA to suspend licenses in Maryland for bad behavior violations in other states?
So we have been asked the question in the past, so we conferred with the AG, who told us we would need specific legislative authority to do that, so we don't currently
But do you
have
like it? Do you like that
existing
idea,
authority to do. So I will say this, we don't even have authority to take any action or even know. What concerns me is we don't know what the universe of automated enforcement looks like in the state of Maryland. I can't tell you, and I feel like as a highway safety rep, I should be able to, speeding, red light running, all these really serious crash indicators that people might be doing on multiple occasions. I just don't have that complete visibility on at this point.
Yeah.
So while I appreciate the reciprocity discussion, obviously we've engaged with DC, so we're trying to do our part under what we can. I think I would first want to start at home because, those are the jurisdictions that folks are traveling in all the time, and right now I just don't have that visibility. And I worry over time that driving record was built up as the way to take action to reinforce positive behavior, right? It's not about punishment, but it's about how do we make sure somebody transforms their behavior.
Right.
If we lose that visibility, then what happens?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's a financial penalty, but in terms of changing that driver behavior, is the financial piece alone enough to do that?
Okay. Some other disconcerting numbers I found in a report from a year or two ago that I was just wondering if y'all were tracking, which is there are a few reports out there that look at pedestrian deaths in particular. We're 18th per capita in pedestrian deaths, which is not very good. We're behind places, or we have more deaths per capita than places like the rural places like Kentucky and Missouri, but we're also have way more than more densely populated states like Massachusetts and Rhode Island that would probably be closer to peers. We're also ahead of our neighbors, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia. They all have lower deaths too. But I thought what was really striking, I was just wondering if this is something that y'all look at, is we are 5th in 2 really, really despicable stats. One, we're 5th in the percentage share of our deaths being pedestrians. We're 5th in the country. And then, and this is, I don't mean this to be an indictment of you guys, but I do think that it's disturbing. We're also 5th in the share of our pedestrian deaths being on state roads. So my question is, have y'all looked at those numbers before and how we're comparing to other states in both the share of pedestrians as it relates to other deaths and also the share of pedestrian deaths on state roads versus county and local roads?
I think I'll start off and then I'll turn it over to Will. I know certainly SHA is looking at the pedestrian crashes and what can be done in those specific instances. The Highway Safety Office also did a very detailed pedestrian crash analysis where we took a look at, for a given period of time, pedestrian crashes and really dove in, looking at the detail level, trying to figure out what the causation was. At the end of the day, the report essentially said that there were so many different reasons for each of those crashes happening. Again, it wasn't that one answer, that those 2 or 3 answers that would solve the issue of pedestrian fatalities. One thing that we have added to our outreach campaign, you mentioned state roads specifically, and I'd like to mention this, is that individuals getting out of their car on roadways, whether that's because of crash, whether that's because you had a mechanical issue. We have seen so many individuals struck and killed on our roadways, and that is considered in the pedestrian data. So we've got a whole campaign that we do with state police, Transportation Authority, police, SHA, stay in your vehicle. It's such an important message, and I see it every day traveling our roads, and I'm sure you do too. Then there's the city center kind of environment where you've got a much different dynamic, right? You've got transit, and you've got pedestrians, and you've got just a lot of density there. And then your more rural roads where, maybe you don't have those crosswalks or other indicators, at a particular juncture that are convenient for people to travel by. So yes, this is an area we've looked at quite specifically, that pedestrian bicycle emphasis area team. It's something they're deeply engaged in. They picked corridors along with working with our folks, our partners in the engineering side of the house. And so it is something that we are deeply engaged in. We've got to figure it out, but it's not an easy one to crack because there are so many different causes when you really look down at the crash level.
That's helpful. I appreciate it. Mr. Chair, if I could do one more, sorry. It's brief. One other sort of just bill policy idea that I wanted to take y'all's temperature on. We saw last session, and we're going to see some more sessions, some bills this session, I'm sure, about enhancing penalties for things like reckless driving and other forms of dangerous driving. I know there was a bill in particular last year that wasn't perfect, that's why it didn't even pass the committee, that you guys remained neutral on. So I was just wondering, and I don't know if it's that bill in particular, I know you guys weighed in favor of, for example, Delegate Lehman's bill on exhibition driving too, in favor. My question is, obviously there are a lot of causes for why these pedestrians' deaths are still up and persistently up. Obviously there are a lot of potential solutions, and I think the presentation does a great job of highlighting that. My question is, do y'all think that enhancing penalties, whether that's points, whether that's fine amounts, whether that's must-appear violations, is part of the solution that we should be weighing and considering strongly this session?
I do think penalties are one signal that from a policy standpoint, the state takes these issues seriously and cares about them. That's one of the reasons that the work zone safety fines were increased, because we heard the message loud and clear that the $40 was not appropriate for the significance of speeding and putting somebody's life in danger, and ultimately in those tragic cases we had taking someone's life. And so I do think they send an appropriate signal. We do have a departmental that establishes parameters on folks who have killed somebody or left the scene of a very significant crash, when they can get their license reinstated. Again, it's about that policy signal, right? Is it appropriate for somebody to be able to check some boxes and then get their license back, or should there be a period of time that the state says you have to wait to be relicensed? So I think there's not one answer. Again, I do think that those are signals, important policy signals that do shape behavior.
If I could add as well, so any specific bill that we took no position on, sometimes that's just a reflection that most of the speed monitoring bills are county focused. They're the monitoring system is going to be run by the county. So the state really feels like it's appropriate to defer to that county. However, when the county then does bring their requests to State Highway to install speed monitoring within the county on the state route, we have supported the installation of speed monitoring for actual physical locations, and we do that often. So,
yeah, there's a camera right across from my house on a state road near a school, yeah. That you
right,
put in.
So while every bill is unique and how the position we took, there's a lot of issues that could go into that. When it comes to putting speed monitoring on state routes, when we see a high volume of pedestrian and bicycle fatalities, we know it's a tool that works, and we work to get them in place when we can.
I'll just jump in and say, under Secretary Wiedefeld's leadership, we don't have all the right answers, right? It's a team. And that's the kind of advocacy component of what we're trying to do. We need to support our partners that have good ideas, and it's I hate the saying, but it's a little bit of all of the above type solutions, right? Not every solution will work. Not every solution is right for the context or the situation that we're dealing with. But at the end of the day, one roadway fatality is one too many for us, and so we've got to be working together to try to find solutions that are achievable here.
Cool. Thank you all again.
Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our panelists for the presentation. Ms. Neiser, I want to say in particular, I applaud your emphasis on the term crash rather than talking about accidents, as that sounds obviously too benign. So Delegate Stewart just threw out a bunch of additional, statistics, which are very enlightening, Delegate Stewart, but can you just say overall where Maryland ranks nationally in terms of roadway fatalities? Like, just for, say, 2024, do you know that yet?
We can get back to
573 or 573 fatalities is probably in the top half of the country. We are certainly far behind the larger states of California and Texas and things like that.
Yeah, so just,
I
sorry,
thought we were-
you're going to have to come up
Would you like
to,
him to come
if we want the people who are our millions of fans to hear this, you got to come up to a microphone because they will not be able to hear that you're talking.
Pull a chair up.
I know you want to be live on the internet. Thank you so much.
Just introduce yourself.
Yep. Thank you for the question, Madam Delegate. For the record, my name is Tim Kearns. I'm the Director of the Highway Safety Office for Maryland and the Vision Zero Coordinator for the office. Maryland's probably in the top half. It really goes along the size of the state. As far as looking at our region, Region 3 for NHTSA looks at Delaware, Maryland, West Virginia. We are higher than most of our partners, except for North Carolina. Virginia is also, I believe, higher when it comes to fatalities. But 573 is, about what you have with a state of this size. Years ago, there was a comparison between Maryland and Massachusetts because population-wise, a lot of other demographics and things, they were relatively equal. Maryland was a little bit higher than Massachusetts, but as far as straight-up comparisons go, that's
Okay,
probably
because
where
I
we're
thought
going.
I had read in the last few years that we were in the top 10. That's not the case?
We are not in the top 10.
Okay,
But we can provide you the follow-up.
We can give you the
Okay, thank you.
final ranking for.
thank you for that. Okay,
most recent
and
year.
so I want to go back to, in part, what Delegate Foley raised about the causes of these accidents and being focused on the driver. So she raised the issue that a distraction wasn't on that list. But I feel like with, at least in your presentation, that, emphasizing impaired driving, speeding, and unrestrained, can I assume that that means somebody not wearing a seatbelt?
Exactly.
Okay. I feel like at least the presentation neglected really to emphasize very much until Mr. Pine spoke about that infrastructure piece, that infrastructure review piece, where, and not certainly just to get into the, attributing the accident to the driver versus the pedestrian, but I feel like there's a failure to acknowledge all the many places in this state, and I've lived my whole life in Prince George's, I see it from north to central to South County, where there is such a dearth of infrastructure that, the vast majority of people are not purposely walking in areas where that aren't safe or they shouldn't be. They have no real choice. And so could you address that a little bit and talk about if there's more information in your report than you presented today? That cannot be an afterthought.
No, and it certainly is not. I'm sorry if it came across that way. But when we talk about the 4 E's of highway safety, it is each of those components that are an important part of it. And certainly engineering is right there. To your point, if you have to walk a mile down the road to get to a crosswalk, people are going to make a decision to get where they need to be, and that could likely put their life in danger. In the Highway Safety Office, we do focus on the behavioral component, which takes the lead on, or even other crashes, to say, where do we need to focus resources? And I know that's something, even in terms of investments that are being made in the infrastructure, that we really are looking at. So it certainly didn't mean to
So,
not acknowledge
Mr. Pines,
that.
can you just expound that a little bit on
Absolutely,
where this review
yeah.
fits in? And it's not hopefully an afterthought, but where and how does it fit into, the analysis of what went on with individual accidents and then big picture?
Sure. So, big picture, our roadways, we know, when I was discussing with Delegate Ruth, that mobility has been prioritized for many, many years on our highway system, where adding lanes, building wider highways to get motorists from point A to B faster has been the focus of the goals, not just in Maryland, but nationally. That's been how highway agencies operated. That's why the Complete Streets policy is so important. When we talk about it, it sounds like, oh, it's a document on a shelf. No, it's a guiding principle to say that that approach has resulted in harm to people. And we need to bring balance to our highway system with this safety focus being a top priority. And so we know that there are many gaps in accessibility and connectivity in our network. That's not a surprise. That's why we have efforts both nationally, Federal Highway, that when we talk about the vulnerable road user report, that's a requirement. That's not even, we're not just doing that proactively because we know we have an issue. That's actually a federal requirement because federally they recognize that this is an issue nationally, right? So the two layers that we have, that pedestrian safety action plan has looked at the corridors throughout the state where the most fatalities have happened. Sometimes that's due to lack of connections, sidewalks missing, bike lanes, et cetera. Those types of amenities are not there. And then sometimes they're not well crafted and they have a lot of conflict points with driveways, with shopping center entrances. And so we need to rethink how design is approached for those. Beyond I think the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan has 21, 23 corridors in it. The Vulnerable Road User Report has 110 corridors that are the most dangerous throughout the state. You add in all of the corridors that didn't make the cut, right? That they didn't make the cut, not necessarily because there weren't sidewalks there or the things that we're talking about, but just simply there weren't enough fatalities to rise to the top of the corridors that needed the most attention. There's a lot of needs statewide, we know that. On the fatal infrastructure reviews, we do a deep dive into are there engineering issues at the locations? Are there maintenance issues? As Administrator Nizer mentioned, the Vision Zero Commission meeting, we had a case where it was a person who got out of their vehicle, you get a flat tire, you get out to check on it, and you get sideswiped. That's technically a pedestrian. Our road workers, when they're out working on the road, if they're hit by a vehicle, that's a pedestrian fatality. So we have to look at them each individually to decide, like, not every one of those cases triggers building a sidewalk, but there are some that do. So.
Great, thank you. One more quick question,
If
Mr.
I can, sorry, Delegate, just real quick. One other element is, culture and leadership matter on this one, right? So from the Secretary on down to my colleagues here, changing outcomes and strategies is really important. What Will's mentioning, and I need to give, him and his team a lot of credit. It takes time to move large institutions like this, but he is working tremendously hard to change the standards and the expectations. The Complete Streets Leadership Academy, the quick build effort, we can't be doing that everywhere. Not every road works. We actually have to do physical, moving of concrete and other types of stuff like that. But for a relatively modest sum of money, and very quickly in the world of infrastructure improvements, we were able to meaningfully reduce speed and improve safety outcomes in 3 vulnerable areas of the state. And I think that that's a culture shift for SHA and an opportunity for us to continue to expand to more corridors throughout the state as we move forward too.
Thank you for that. Excuse me, my other question related to the issue of folks out at the side of the road for different things, whether it's car repair or whatever else. How do you categorize, or where do like highway and road workers, other public service workers, departments of public works, law enforcement, where do they fit into this in terms of your numbers and how you look at those situations?
They're categorized as pedestrians. If they're outside the vehicle, they're all categorized as pedestrians. And the difficulty in identifying them specifically is the crash report itself. When we just look at the boxes they fill out, we'll mark them as a pedestrian. We have to go deeper into the narrative to see why they were where they were. So if their narrative is liable to say the person was outside the vehicle changing a tire, or if it was law enforcement, we can see some of that through the narrative, but they'll be classified as pedestrians.
So even, for example, the workers on the Key Bridge, they were pedestrians in that
The
situation.
workers on the Key Bridge weren't classified as a motor vehicle crash. So on the 695 workers were all pedestrians, but the workers in the Key Bridge weren't categorized in our data. And back to your first question, we're 25th. 25th in nationally for fatalities.
Oh, 25th, exactly. Okay, halfway. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you. I wait, do I have to wait?
Never. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, Secretary Nizer, Assistant Secretary, everyone, administrators, thank you all. Administrator Nizer, Administrator. New to the committee, relearning all the names. Anyway, thank you for your great presentation. I'm really so pleased to see the emphasis at the highest levels of our transportation agency on pedestrian safety, crash prevention, and human-centered design to improve public health in our state. So I'm a public health person, so I see transportation as a social determinant of health. And you guys are absolutely partners, so I really thank you. I'm curious, as much as we now know about with the great dashboard, with Secretary Wiedefels' emphasis on complete streets, all of it, we've really come a long way. I'm interested in one particular metric that I didn't hear about, and that is the disparate impact of pedestrian injury and fatality as it falls on people of color. African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans are more likely to be injured and lose their lives as pedestrians in crashes. And there's a data gap here in Maryland. Some of you may know, because I've been obsessed and fanatical about this for years. In 2019, I think, I introduced, and we didn't really pass, a bill to study crash data, disparate impact. I know, because it's complicated. There are several different data sources that go into measuring pedestrian injury and fatality, and particularly non-fatal injury, we don't know much about. And that has an enormous impact on public health outcomes. In Baltimore City, for example, it's estimated that about 1,200 people are injured as pedestrians in crashes. That dwarfs the very, the much more attended statistics on violent crime. Everybody knows how many homicides we had in Baltimore last year, but no one talks about all the non-fatal pedestrian injury. So people who are maimed, people who are then unable to work or go to school. There's a lot of human cost to non-fatal pedestrian injury, and it falls disproportionately on African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans. So I'm wondering if we might someday get to the point where, unlike most other states in the country, we can measure the true benefit of our Vision Zero efforts and genuinely say that we're making a difference for the people who are already most harmed. So I hope you can, it's a big question. I've noticed that in this committee, apparently everyone gets to ask unlimited questions. I'm kind of enjoying that.
Yeah, but is there a question, Delegate Lewis? Because I think the Health and Government Operations might have reprogrammed it. So we can come into a question mark?
No, there's no, but really, how can you help us get to the place where we can really measure the benefits of Vision Zero for the people who are really most impacted? And that's disproportionately falling on Blacks and Latinos and Native Americans.
Yeah, I agree, and thank you for the question, and thank you for the reference to health departments, because that's one thing we've really emphasized with the local strategic highway safety plans. We've made a deliberate outreach to our local health departments to be a part of that conversation, because there's so many tools that local health officers bring to the table to help in this conversation that health departments have used for years. Oh, I'm sorry. So the health departments are a very key partner at the local level. It is a challenge because unlike drivers who have licenses, hopefully, that allow us to find out a lot of information and connect to that individual record we have at the MBA. That's not always true with pedestrians. That being said, I will say that there is requirements under the new federal transportation funding bill that state highway safety offices really look at those communities that are underserved and most impacted by crashes and fatalities and injuries. And so that's an effort where, I've referenced some of the communities in Prince George's County where, you can find out information in terms of demographics and where those crashes are happening. And if they're happening in communities that don't have the resources that maybe they have in other communities, that might be an area we need to reach out in a little different way than we're used to reaching out. So it is a new posture for the Highway Safety Office. We are actively engaging with communities. You'll see our partners, if you go to State Highway Administration meetings, there to take feedback, to listen, to hear from the community. We're really trying to have a different posture, a different approach to our outreach than we've ever had in the past. I think there's a lot more work to do. As you said, these are highly complex issues, but I think we are really trying to reach those communities that maybe haven't had their voices heard in the past and figure out how we work with them to solve this problem collectively.
And I hear you, and Mr. Chair, I have to focus in on the data and reporting we need data for good decision-making, and what's missing, we simply don't have data on how many African-American, Latinos, and Native Americans were injured, non-fatally injured in pedestrian crashes. And without that data, we don't know where specifically the harm is falling, where there may be design issues that are leading to these outcomes so that we can intervene through design methods. I think the outreach is super important, and that is like half the battle. Thank you for your commitment to that. But if we're not measuring, reporting, and analyzing and making decisions based on data, I don't see how we really reach our Vision Zero goals. Thank you.
I think that'll be a conversation we continue to have with the additional grant funding we've just received. What can we do in that area as we move forward? So thank you for that.
If I could just add as well, in terms of outcomes, I didn't mention this in my remarks about the pedestrian safety action plan and the vulnerable road user report. There are a number of different metrics that weigh into how the corridors were selected. Equity is a basis of one of them, along with crash statistics, what the existing conditions are. So, where our investments are going are driven by those two reports, and those two reports, equity is one of the factors that drives the outcomes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don't touch the button. Thank you guys for the presentation, and to Administrator Pines, this probably couldn't be timed better. The PSAP. Tonight in my district, we have the opportunity to hear the first briefing on PSAP. Saturday, I'll be up here, but you and I are going to talk about it later, I think. The concern I have with PSAP and what you've described is it sounds great. Yet what we're going to study tonight, we spent so much money in the last 20 years that it looks like we're just trying to put some ice cream and put some chocolate sauce on top to make it taste good. Yet at the same time, when the CTP came out the other day, many of the projects that we have wanted are deferred indefinitely. So my question becomes is, while the PSAP is interesting, and we talk about speed and rural enforcement or really lack thereof, I know the corridor that we're going to be studying intimately. And I'm just wondering, when you do the PSAP, are we sacrificing, are we putting ice cream, or putting chocolate on the ice cream, putting chocolate on the ice cream, and are we sacrificing road improvements that have been sitting the CTP for years?
Certainly, there are a lot of projects in the CTP that have been there for many years that have an older view of how to approach design, how projects are done, meaning like the conversation we just had earlier about investments in balancing mobility versus safety. We are prioritizing PSAP and VRU corridors because those are where fatalities are happening. And if we're going to bend the curve, we need to make investments there to address that. The CTP, as published, does have a lot of funding for various projects that are in the system preservation program. So I'm not certain that some of the projects that you may want to see won't end up getting funding through some of that. I'd really have to look at the specific projects, and happy to chat about with you.
Yeah, I figure we can defer this till later, but I just want to at least bring it to your attention today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. And just to be clear, when you go on the back of a resurfacing contract and put in bike lanes, that's a lot cheaper than, say, building a new interchange.
Putting in bike lanes can be a lot cheaper than an interchange. It's case specific, obviously, in all.
Okay. Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I am very grateful to see all of you there and that you're singing from the same book. And it's very helpful because one of the problems we've always seen is, silos, even within departments. And your department is doing spectacular work here. And especially, I'm very glad to have the person from planning as part of this. I have 2 or 3 very short questions. One is, do you have somewhere in your department any kind of technical support for local governments to actually do the Complete Street initiative for their own communities? In their, where I represent an area mostly inside the Beltway in Prince George's County, and there are multiple municipalities, and they have multiple concerns about some of the same state highway that runs through several jurisdictions. And some of them have technical support. They need technical support because they don't have the resources within their town, but they have the need to have something designated as a complete street. Does the state provide any kind of technical support for these small municipalities?
So we have different fund sources and different opportunities. Just later this month, we're going to be hosting a Complete Streets training for various stakeholders, and we're going to continue to do that because I think at the end of the day, it's not just us and our roads, it's our partners as well. So we can certainly get in touch and make sure that your constituents are brought into the fold there if they haven't already received information. And then I'll just say, Administrator Pine's team also has planning assistance, but, one of the themes is we're not in this on our own. We've got to be doing this together. So we'd love to partner, educate, and grow together.
And I wanted to ask you specifically from a planning perspective about priority funding areas throughout the state, which include a lot of the areas that are most densely populated, where there are a lot more fatalities just because there are more people, and the interactions between pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles is more likely to happen, and it's going to be more so as they, as our housing policies move toward having more density. So my question for you is, again, about priority funding areas as a place to focus the Complete Streets programs.
Yeah, so one of the items that the chairman may recall from the Train Commission short while ago was priorities and prioritizing our funding for expansion and just prioritizing our funding for system preservation. We were directed by the Train Commission in last year's interim report to look at creating a prioritization program. And we have a bill that will be coming forward this year to try to do that. That will be amending the Chapter 30 process that was put in place a number of years ago, making it from a may to a shall. So all projects that need to be considered for expansion shall go through the program. And in so doing, shall be scored with a data-driven, transparent, outcome-oriented approach, things like safety. And when we say safety, it's not just fender benders, but it's roadway fatalities and reducing those measures, equity, land use components.
What about, if I could just stop just for a second, about the local government's role in that? Because they may see on the ground what you don't see from a state highway or state position, what's happening in their communities.
Yeah, so 2 items. One, right now, each local government is afforded the ability to request priority projects or plans through the priority letters. Also, through the Train Commission, we were requested to standardize that process as best one can. So we will be creating an online portal this year for folks to request things from the state. We will also be asking for them to request and prioritize planning and elements, and we will be judging those requests against those priorities that you've been talking about, that I was talking about, ultimately trying to build that pipeline in a more transparent, accountable, data-driven, outcome-oriented manner.
All of that, but the ultimate goal is safety for the pedestrians in these areas where there are going to be more pedestrians and more cars in the future.
Safety is the first value in that rubric, yeah.
And that's what I wanted to make sure we understood. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And because I know I'm the last, I want to get through these thoroughly. And thank you all for being here. This is very good information, very valuable information. And I'm glad, to the point of Chair Healy, that you're all singing from the same hymnal. Very quickly, I wanted to ask about fatal crashes and injuries, and if there's a correlation where actually, what is the percentage of those that are essentially either out of state drivers and or out of state just license plates, as I know Delegate Jacqueline T. Addison would talk about out of state license, and is there a correlation there? I wanted to start there.
I don't have data in front of me. I don't know if Dr. Kearns does, but we can certainly get back to you on that. I know certainly we are looking at the out-of-state tag issue in particular. I know there have been some high-profile crashes involving drivers from out of state.
Sure.
With those, we communicate with other jurisdictions when those crashes occur so that violations follow the driver, with the goal of making sure that all drivers are safe regardless if they're traveling on our roadways. We will look for that specific data if we can tease that out, though, and get it to you.
And then one more data point, the number of those potentially uninsured in those fatal crashes and injuries.
Certainly, and I know as part of that out-of-state tag report, part of that looks at what Maryland Auto had in terms of their collectibles, so we did get some data on that point. We'll make sure you get that.
Okay, and just a quick point or comment. I'm hoping at some point my driving record as it relates to my insurance would be linked to, the number of speeding tickets or red light camera tickets or accidents that I have, so that there could be, from case to case, if I come from another state, I can look at their driving records per their insurance and be like, oof. You could make potential, not too much judgment, but know that there's some work there as it relates to behavioral changes. Second, I wanted to quickly, could you touch back on the Green Lab? Yes, we just passed cannabis legislation, and I know there's some tension about cannabis and quote-unquote correlations to bad behavior, in some cases not. So I just would love to hear just a little bit more about it, as you talked about the training, and then how, I guess the question is, because we've passed legislation talking about probable cause and knowing that, quote-unquote, for instance, smell. Thank you, Delegate Deborah Davis, and those folks. That's not a probable cause to stop someone. So I guess I'm wanting a little bit more about the Green Lab, what we're, quote-unquote, looking to study and train, and then what is the essentially outcome as it relates to, I guess, cannabis, and I'm assuming driving, just like alcohol and driving. I think you're trying to make maybe a parity. So can you get a little bit more information?
Certainly. And so what we want is to make sure law enforcement is trained so that they're making legal stops that have good outcomes and ultimately change behavior. And so we know that with alcohol, it is clear in terms of impairment levels and how that works, and there's case law that is settled to a large extent, although changes happen over time. The same is not true with cannabis, as we know, and we are still working through that, as all highway safety offices and safety professionals throughout the country are. One other thing we recognize, though, is law enforcement needs education on it. And so what we did is working with our law enforcement jurisdictions and some of our highway safety partners, individuals who are currently on medical marijuana, who volunteer to be a part of this effort, come to safe locations, knowing they will have a safe ride home at the end of that evening, afternoon, and they consume in a manner that they feel safe to do so, and they engage with law enforcement who are in a learning exercise, just wanting to understand the impact that, consuming cannabis has on an individual, knowing that there are differences in how that is consumed, knowing there are differences in each individual metabolizes it, but also wanting to see what signs can be there. So law enforcement does some of the field sobriety tests, which I'm sure you're familiar with, many of them, to see what happens before and what happens after consumption. And so it's about everybody learning. And to be honest, I've been to some of them, and it's a great dialogue, I think, from both sides. I think everybody walks away feeling a little more informed about the process.
And then just one little piece with that, if I, before quote-unquote recreational cannabis, if I had a medical card, were there restrictions on driving before then?
So what we've always said is, under our law, it is illegal to be impaired, right? But the challenge is obviously the testing component as it comes to marijuana and drugs. So oftentimes, frankly, what we're seeing now is consumption of both alcohol and drug use. And so generally what happens, and this is a challenge in giving good data, is that if alcohol is in the system and a test is done and it's above 0.08, generally it stops there, unless it's at the medical examiner's office, frankly. So we don't have great data in terms of what we're seeing there out there on the roadway. So the message we try to convey, to be as clear as possible with our drivers, it is illegal to be impaired behind the wheel. That is whether you are impaired by cannabis or whether you're impaired by alcohol. And that's the message that we put out there.
Or my medication for
and
whatever.
Medication, even legal medication can make you impaired. So we kind of go through, and the advertising campaign goes through all the various types of impairment that are out there.
That's interesting. My next question is as cars become more safe and as we embark upon automation, where do you see car automation fitting into the reduction in crashes and fatalities? And especially as it relates to pedestrian and cyclists, because I'm not going to be in any Jetson driving car anytime soon, or too afraid. But the ability to distinguish potentially between a cyclist or a walking pedestrian. But just your thoughts on how that will potentially help or drive down fatalities?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We have a connected and automated vehicle working group, as you know, but some others might not, that the department leads, because we believe that it can truly make a difference as we look at automation in vehicles. That timeline that was referenced earlier, a lot of that is developments related to technology in the vehicle. Even electronic stability control, which is not that old, frankly, has been credited with really reducing some crashes. We recently weighed in on a requirement for manufacturers to test vehicles related to pedestrian crashworthiness, right? How does that vehicle interact with a vulnerable roadway user? Making a standard for that. There's not one now, right? So we weighed in on that because it's important. If manufacturers aren't thinking about those issues, then they're not going to design their vehicles. We know they're heavier. We know they're built bigger. We know that's an issue for any vulnerable roadway users. And so it's a huge area, I think, from a technology standpoint. The signals that your car can now send to you can help you avoid that crash. We hear too often from drivers that they turn off those signals because in some cases they may not be the most user-friendly. There might not be the education there. And so that's what we're really looking at as a department. How do we use the technology in a way that helps the driver, is not distracting to the driver, because I think it really can help reduce crashes and fatalities.
And then my last question is, given the, as it relates to the state highway safety plans, how, given Baltimore City's unique responsibility for its own runways, how you coordinate and work with them on their essentially strategic plans?
Yeah, so the city does have their own plan, which is unique. As you said, it's crafted in a slightly different way than some of the other local plans, but I think that is a reflection of the needs of the city and how they've come together to build that. I think whether it's from an engineering perspective or certainly from a behavioral perspective, that partnership is really critical. The additional resources the Baltimore Metropolitan Council provides as well to help build that out, the expertise that's there. That position, and I want to emphasize emphasize that that grant-funded position at BMC is a direct resource, not only for all the jurisdictions in their region, but they've extended beyond that. And that's something we pay for out of the highway safety dollars because we think it's so critical for those jurisdictions to have the resource. I don't want for that to be a reason that somebody doesn't develop a plan or move forward in effort. We recognize resources are scarce, especially at the local level, no matter how big the jurisdiction is. So we're there to support them. That's our job.
Thank you so much.
Administrator Neiser, sorry if I missed this. It sounded like you were referencing the Chapter 648 report on out-of-state plates, the Delegate Addison bill from last year. I think that report was due December 1st. Have we seen that report?
Not yet, Mr. Chair.
Okay, do you know when we might see the report that was due December 1st?
Very shortly, I hope. It is complete. It's going through final review.
Great. So can you give me a sense of time, not in short and long, but like days, weeks, hours?
Soon.
Seriously, what is soon?
I'll get back to you. I just don't know. It's
great.
not in my hands right now.
Okay, let's follow up right after this
Will do.
hearing, and you can bring whoever else you need to follow up on that. I also want to ask about the infrastructure reviews. There was a lot of discussion about them already. Thank you for your work on those. It's very important. They are now public thanks to legislation previously passed in the General Assembly. They're now voted on at that, I don't know if we're calling it committee or commission, thanks to legislation passed by the General Assembly. I was taking a look at about 100 of them, and less than 20 identified any deficiencies. All the rest said N/A for deficiencies. Can you just talk about that? I think that's probably for Administrator Pines. Can you just talk about that and what is that supposed to indicate? Is that just because it's someone got out of their car parked on a highway? I mean, what does that indicate? What should we take from that?
So thank you again for the question. Related to deficiencies, if there's an engineering deficiency, the last meeting, for example, when we looked at one of the fatalities that had occurred, the push button worked at the location that the pedestrian was, but a push button within the same intersection didn't. So we found that and we identified that as a deficiency and we fixed it. It was not germane to the actual fatality, but it was something that we had identified at the holistic look. There are other issues that occur where a pedestrian, aside from those things like work zones, folks changing their tire, those things that are access controlled highways, sometimes we have folks who will walk on Interstate 95 in the middle of the night and they get hit. That's not intended to have pedestrians on it. And so that gets counted in there. But when we look at it, we're like, there's no deficiency in terms of the highway here because it's an access controlled highway. There are cases where, part of the safe system approach, the federal highway safe system approach, recognizes that humans make mistakes. All of us do. And some of the infrastructure reviews, when you look at the information, we're not in no way trying to blame any victims when deaths occur, but sometimes the circumstances, things like impairment and other factors are the primary contributors to the fatalities. And so those might have an NA for deficiency. So there's a number of reasons that can result in that.
Okay, I mean, I hate to give you a hypothetical because I know these are all case by case to one of your earlier comments, but let's say you have a super block, right, without crossings, without stoplights for long distances. And humans being humans want to get from point A to point B. Let's say there's a 7-Eleven across the street. So they are darting across the road and get hit. Are there deficiencies in that case because it's a super block and there aren't a lot of crossings, or is that not to blame the victim, but a human is a human? Where would that fall on the deficiencies N/A scale?
Candidly, I'm not exactly sure on that case. I'd have to go back and talk to our experts that actually do those infrastructure reviews to know that example. I will do that and inform you specifically on how that case would be treated. But that being said, we refer to those as mid-block crossings. There was a bill a couple years back that was put forward that it requested for us to install mid-block crossings at intervals and define that. Is it 1,000 feet? Is it 500 feet? We did, as part of that whole process, commit to trying to identify that in our design documents. And as part of our complete streets policy, that is something that we're looking at incorporating. We know that it'll be based on context. Certainly we don't need mid-block crossings on a country road, but we do need to look at mid-block crossings in urban town centers and suburban cores. Those areas that have a high desire to get to important amenities. So we know that's a need. I talked earlier about the lack of infrastructure and historical design process, but we certainly are pursuing to incorporate that into our features and leverage the Highway Safety Improvement Program funding to put out contracts that would actually install those. Our pedestrian safety action plan is doing them in a number of areas. We're partnering on certain projects, like Montgomery County is implementing the BRT program. Within that program, they are following a complete streets policy and are have already submitted design requests to us to add mid-block crossings. So that is something that we are pushing ourselves.
Great, thank you, and thank you to this panel. Obviously, there was a lot of questions and interest, and you probably heard a lot of breadcrumbs about legislation you'll be called upon to give your views on. So thank you so much for being here. We will turn to our county representative representing the Prince George's County Department of Public Works and Transportation, as well as the Maryland Association of Counties, is Vic Weisberg.
Good afternoon. Chair Corman, members of the committee, would like to thank you, thank MACO, and thank MDOT, who has been a terrific partner on this and many other issues in moving forward some very, very important issues and our agenda. Wanted to, for the record, I'm Victor Weisberg with the Prince George's County Department of Public Works and Transportation. Prince George's County, I think, is fairly representative and is a diverse county that is roughly 1/3 urban, 1/3 rural, and 1/3 suburban. So we cover a lot of bases. Our program really sort of started to take off in this sort of the 2010, 2012 period where the then county executive commissioned a county stat report to be done, which, found and, citing the very serious problem and number of crashes, injuries, and fatalities in the county, we really wanted to zero in and do a lot more. Some of the findings of that report was that we needed dedicated staff. We needed to actually talk better between agencies, both within the county, but also our external partners. And of course, more dedicated resources. We started applying for grants. We got a few, especially some Safe Routes to School grants. In the 2016 period, we did start to staff up. We had a dedicated bicycle and pedestrian coordinator brought on board. We also started to work in a much more strategic fashion, working with the state. I think we were the second county to develop a strategic highway safety plan for the county. And we also were one of the first jurisdictions, I believe, in the country that developed a set of urban street standards to really be able to focus in more on safety. In our sort of chronological history, we, realized that, we needed to step things up even further. And in 2019, then County Executive Also Brooks, Senator Also Brooks, called for us becoming a Vision Zero jurisdiction, and that was in 2019. in implementing that action plan, or in implementing that program, an action plan was developed and has been the sort of guidance for implementation. Very recently, there's been an update to our urban street standards, which are, very forward-thinking and progressive. Currently, our Vision Zero team is focusing on the next action plan, which will be a 2025 to 2030 plan. And as part of that, we are updating a lot of the information, updating our high injury network corridors, and using that as the cookbook, if you will, for moving forward. As Administrator Pines noted, equity is a critical part of our program, zeroing in on where the most vulnerable road users are, how we can address that issue. We identified several intersections. I think we were mostly state intersections that could be integrated as part of SHA's Vulnerable Road User Program. And we've been working very closely with MDOT on that and other initiatives. Statistically, you can see that 2024, the numbers started to significantly come down. And fatal crashes were in 2023, they were at 129, and 2024, that number came down to 93, showing a 28% reduction in fatal crashes. As far as similarly with pedestrian fatalities, there also was a significant reduction, 27.3 between 2023 and 2024. So hopefully we are finally turning the corner and are hopeful and optimistic that trend will continue. As part of a comprehensive program, traditionally we have operated under what was known as some call it the 4 E's. We actually added equity and evaluation as part of our E's, which traditionally were education, enforcement, engineering, and emergency management. We are now transitioning to a safe systems approach, which I'll touch on a little bit later. A key component of that program is outreach. And you can see some of the pictures of some of our community events. One is at the Cherokee Lane Elementary School that I believe is in Delegate Lehman's district, and University of Maryland Day, which I believe is in Delegate Healy's district. We created a pop-up traffic garden where we got out there early in the morning and with chalk created a traffic garden that even had a purple line, showed the purple line and a purple line platform. So we were trying to cover all of the modes. But that is, having that kind of community outreach is a really important part of our program. As I mentioned, engineering is a critical component, and you can see some of the improvements that we've made very recently. One is implementing a roundabout in a community that had a very complex intersection, and we feel that's going to really help slow traffic down and make it a much safer, much more manageable intersection. You can see some pedestrian bump outs And we have an RRFB in front of the Dianet Center on Good Luck Road, which are examples of some of the recent improvements that we have made. And to give you an idea of the sort of the scope of the type of improvements, everything from, speed humps, and this was just in 2023, speed humps, new and replaced sidewalk. We've done 40 neighborhood roadway audits, some, major roadway safety projects that have been completed, street lighting, a significant number of roadway miles resurfaced, replacing, various, curb and ADA improvements, and of course, a variety of traffic signals that have been added. Moving forward, we were very fortunate to receive in the first round of the Safe Streets for All program, what we call our Proud to Pave the Way multimodal safety program, which we received $21 million as part of a little higher than $25 million program to improve seven corridors, seven separate projects in the county. Several of them are in the vicinity of the Purple Line and will help residents who live in the communities very close to some of the Purple Line stations be able to do so much safely. We also have targeted some of the county roadways that had the highest number of crashes and fatalities. So we're implementing that program as we speak and moving forward. As I mentioned earlier, we are currently updating our Vision Zero action and implementation plan, and look forward to being able to release that by the end of the year. Also, as mentioned, we are transitioning sort of how we are, looking at our program from the sort of traditional approach where you look at preventing crashes, but under Safe System, you prevent death and serious injuries. And I'm not going to walk through, sort of each of the bullets of a Safe System approach, but it really is looking at how do you take a much more holistic and comprehensive approach. How do you change the culture? And that's what we're really working very hard at doing. And with that, I will conclude my presentation and entertain any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? It's really important to see what our local partners are doing because, as Mako will always remind us, more of the miles are managed by the counties than the state. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Weisberg. Always very good to see you. Thank you for your work. So I wanted to return to this question I had asked the congratulations on bringing those numbers down also, by the way. But I wanted to return to the question I had asked our state panelists about,
Delegate Lehman.
Mr. Pines in particular.
Delegate, it's really hard to hear you. Can you try to just talk into the mic a little bit more?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. I wanted to return to that question about infrastructure review that I posed to Mr. Pines. And so how does the county go about addressing that issue when it looks at individual incidents, but also how well are you working with the state on both sides, you with the state with you? Is that as satisfactory as it could be or should be, whether the accident is on a state road or a local road?
Thank you. Obviously, the first thing we do is we review the data, and we meet with the state on a very regular basis, and safety is usually the first topic that we raise when we meet with them. And you're correct. I mean, of the even the most recent numbers, it's about an 80-20 split in terms of where the fatalities are taking place as far as the state roadways and the county roadways. And we are, very proactive in working with the state. They actually also came to us when they started to work on their vulnerable road users program and asked us to help identify intersections on the state system that we, thought would best fit the vulnerable road users program. So it is looking at the data, working with the state. We are also on their, in fact, our one of the co-chairs of the pedestrian, what they call the P-Beat, which is their pedestrian subcommittee as part of their strategic plan. We work in tandem with them on that, and really every initiative that they're engaged with in the county.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Chair, just really quickly, if I could, that 80-20 split, are you saying 80% of the fatalities or the accidents that result in fatalities are on state roads and 20 on county, or the other way?
No, it's about an approximate 80% on state roads, 20% on county roads.
Okay, thank you. Wow. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Delegate Huey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for being here. I wonder if you could do a couple of things. If you could provide, at least me, with your contact information, because I'd like to meet with you and talk with you at length some other time.
Yep.
And also, if you could provide like a nice paper copy of your slides so that I could write my notes on the side.
Okay.
Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you.
Great. I do not see any other questions, so thank you very much. Great to see you, Vic.
Great to see you.
Colleagues, a couple of quick announcements. First of all, thanks for a great hearing. I'd make fun of you over the questions, but obviously this is a really important topic, and I really appreciate everyone digging in on it. And then just a reminder to try to be on time when we're starting these so that the speaker doesn't get me in trouble for us all starting late. And are there any subcommittee announcements today? Okay, I was going to announce Todd's birthday and acknowledge that he's the tallest member of the Environment and Transportation Committee, but I think he snuck out early to celebrate. So I will turn it over to Delegate Stewart for today in ENT history.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a story for you today about both legislative persistence and bipartisan courage. So 29 years ago, this very committee, then the Environmental Matters Committee, was the epicenter for a session-wide failure to make any progress to curb smoking. So in total, in the 1996 session, 19 anti-smoking bills were introduced, and 0 of them passed, not even in any amended form. 11 of those 19 bills that failed came to this committee. And one of our colleagues at that time was a stalwart vote for the rights of smokers. But that session, for the very first time in his career, he switched sides in favor of HB 331, which would have banned cigarette vending machines in places where kids hung out, like bowling alleys, roller rinks, and movie theaters. That bill in 1996 did fail by a narrow margin of 12-8. It was the closest vote of any of the failed anti-smoking bills that session, and the tobacco lobbyists at the time decried the proponents of the bill as, quote unquote, the health police and the, quote unquote, extremist crazies. But our colleagues' willingness to cross the aisle and join some of his most liberal colleagues in voting for that bill was an early harbinger of the anti-smoking victories that were to come, including finally banning the sale of cigarettes from most vending machines in the year 2000, a decade before the federal government took similar action. So if everyone could put their hands together for our very own anti-cancer crusader himself, Delegate Barry Siliberti.
I think with that, just a reminder, we're back on the floor on Monday, and we are adjourned.